The courtroom was already on fire, metaphorically, though that didn't stop the emergency containment teams from deploying real foam cannons every 10 minutes, just in case sarcasm became flammable. Commander Joanna Jojo Halliburton stood, dead center in the Celestine Judicial Fish's Grand Arbitration Dome, a place designed by 12 species who hated each other and took it out on the architecture. It looked like a tax audit mated with a cathedral and then exploded into existential regret. The floor was reflective obsidian. The walls constantly shifted colors based on witness anxiety levels, and the ceiling was an enormous legal document, made of projected light that updated itself in real time, currently screaming, unprecedented violation, fermentation-based hostility, in pulsating crimson text. Jojo didn't blink. She adjusted her Navy SEAL issue utility belt, slightly stained with dried kombucha foam, and popped a stick of gum into her mouth with the calm precision of someone who had once disarmed a thermonuclear goat in Alaska. The court recognizes the accused. Designation Terran Commander. Serial rank discrepancy pending resolution, boomed High Magistrate Thrix Omnival, who resembled a nervous starfish inside a meat grinder full of glowing feathers. Commander Halliburton, you stand charged with, he flickered. Something. Probably several somethings. Possibly all of them. Jojo cracked her neck. I plead guilty to having better instincts than the interstellar equivalent of a filing cabinet. Audible gasps echoed, mostly from the Plaxery delegation who treated sarcasm as a Class 4 metaphysical assault. Grarx Vintula, the prosecuting squid-lobster hybrid with a monocle surgically grafted into one of his judgmental eye sockets, began vibrating with legal rage. This Terran launched an unsanctioned biochemical salvo using fermented beverages during a ceasefire. That violates, he flicked his claws, Statute 9F, Appendix Rho, Honor Clause Variant Theta, and, she yelled, yeet the tea. Before firing. Somewhere in the gallery, 3 professors from the University of Xenocombat began furiously taking notes. Jojo leaned into the mic. For the record, it was kombucha. Ginger peach, with notes of regret and disappointment. Excellent fizz curve. Grarx twitched. That doesn't help. Defense Counsel Vrenya Glix, a translucent methane jellyfish who pulsed calming blue lights whenever court proceedings became too idiotic for carbon-based digestion, simply hovered in place and muttered, "Continue. Please. Let the chaos breathe." The holographic display activated with a shudder and began replaying the incident, a siege standoff orbiting the minor trade moon of Shelon 6, where the Krellian trade nuns had surrounded a Plaxari delegation ship over alleged violations of seafood transport purity standards. 47 diplomats were locked in a ritual compliance loop involving incense, economic spreadsheets, and a circle of passive-aggressive poetry. Jojo, listed in the files as security liaison, human possibly armed, had apparently observed the situation for 6 hours before calmly requesting access to the galley waste processor, a crate of expired probiotic drinks, and a volleyball named Tony. Here is where she constructs what can only be described as a probiotic mortar system, Grarx narrated, voice high and thin. Observe the trajectory. Note the ignition sequence. She used a chewing gum wrapper to insulate the launch valve. Jojo smirked. Improvised Tactical Deployment Protocol Alpha Tango Booch. Look it up. It doesn't exist. Yeah, she said, and yet, there it is. The video showed glowing barrels arcing through vacuum, striking the Krellian siege frigate mid-sentence during their pre-engagement sermon. The results were catastrophic. Bioreactive fizz-ruptured airlocks, the scent of fruit and vinegar ignited a sacred olfactory taboo, and the flagship retreated under the official military statement of ritual gastrointestinal confusion. The recording paused on Jojo giving a thumbs up to the camera while sipping from a rehydration pouch. The court was silent. Then one Plaxery elder began weeping, not from sadness, but sheer philosophical disorientation. We have waited 3,000 years for closure, he whispered, and she brought it with bubbles. Jojo stepped forward. Look, I didn't break your laws. I bypassed them entirely. You were debating clause phrasing while civilians were about to get flash-boiled in bureaucratic inaction soup. So, I fermented justice. The floor flickered red again. That's not a metaphor, muttered Vrenya. She really did. Grarks erupted. We must establish precedent. No more tactical yogurt. No more beverage bombardments. We are civilized. Jojo shrugged. Define civilized. Because where I'm from, stalling while people die is called negligence. I just accelerated your timeline, with flair. The magistrates began to murmur. Legal constructs dissolved. Cultural paradigms shivered. Somewhere in the gallery, someone whispered, Is she a prophet? And that's when the first academic cult declared Jojo's methods an enlightened doctrine. The second called it strategic improvisational entropy. The third printed T-shirts. And Jojo? She winked at the nearest camera drone and whispered, This is just Monday for me. The court's emergency migraine shutters activated. The war doctrine of 12 empires collapsed in on itself like a souffle in a gravity well. And the kombucha had barely started to ferment. 6 months earlier, before the kombucha bombardment became galactic legend, and before Jojo's name was whispered in academic institutions as both tactician and unholy beverage witch, she had been extremely, profoundly bored. Assigned, as a security liaison by the Terran Free Motion Coalition, a role invented by Earth's Department of Improvised Diplomacy, purely to keep SEALs from breaking things, Commander Joanna Jojo Halliburton found herself trapped aboard the diplomatic trade station Ulmarenta 9, orbiting the moon Chelon 6, during the galaxy's longest-running ceremonial standoff. The Plaxari Ritual Dominion, a species of glacially slow lizard people who believed every action required 15 prayer forms and a notarized vowel, had blockaded a Krellian trade nun fleet for supposedly corrupting a seafood transaction with fiscal disrespect. The Krellians, six-eyed militant accountants in ceremonial robes, responded by launching a spreadsheet so massive it required its own orbital processor. And so, for 92 standard days, the two fleets stood off, engines hot, weapons idle, every ship humming with tension and passive-aggressive legal threats. Inside the station, 47 alien delegates from 19 minor empires gathered to mediate peace using a potent cocktail of incense, untranslated bylaws, and group meditation chants that sounded like a haunted washing machine. Jojo was, officially, there to protect human interests. Unofficially, she had been told to stay chill, say nothing, and don't touch the trade monks. That lasted precisely until hour 6 of the emergency seafood purity arbitration, when a squid in ceremonial armor began arguing about shrimp intention ethics. Jojo rolled her eyes so hard the station lights flickered. Anyone here want to actually do something? She asked. But no one responded, possibly because her galactic basic translator chip had melted slightly from boredom. The Krellians were locked in a cycle of pre-battle sonnets and fiscal haikus, while the Plaxari had just entered Phase 17 of their honorful pre-action tea ceremony. That's when Jojo saw it. A misaligned waste processor venting expired. Kombucha crates, apparently the station's failed attempt at health drinks for Plaxari digestion. Jojo squinted. The fermentation levels were dangerously unstable, the pressure valves hissing like angry fruit gods. It looked like an accident waiting to weaponize itself. And Jojo, ever the overachiever, decided to help it along. Tony, she said to the volleyball she had drawn a face on, which no one had stopped her from doing because no one understood what she was doing. I think it's time we remind these interstellar spreadsheet monks what spontaneous conflict resolution looks like. With a multi-tool, 3 rubber bands, a tactical gum wrapper, and something called a yeast coil stabilizer, Jojo built what she would later refer to as the Kombucha Indirect Fire Reallocation Device, KIFRD, also known as the Fizztapult. She ran tubing through the emergency vent system, redirected coolant from the station's forgotten smoothie bar, and used diplomatic rosettes as structural reinforcement. She didn't ask for permission. She asked for carbonation levels. By the time the galactic mediator was finishing his 9th stanza, on the virtues of economic purity, Jojo had manually aligned her targeting system with her elbow and took aim. "Hold my chai," she said to no one in particular, "and prep the launcher." What followed was not a weapon strike, it was tactical theater. The kombucha burst from the vent tubes like fruity cannonballs of bubbling doom, spinning majestically across vacuum and detonating mid-air with a sound like disappointed enlightenment. The Krellian flagship, caught mid-ritual chant, suffered catastrophic dignity loss. Its honor plating shorted from emotional overload, and its captain, Fleet Commander Tholk Zur-Diak, abandoned engagement protocols and ordered a retreat under Article 7B of Unexpected Philosophical Beverage Warfare. Station chaos ensued. Jojo calmly poured herself a glass from a surviving crate. "Cheers, Tony," she muttered, toasting the volleyball. "We just created a new doctrine, strategic improv idiocy." And that was before the cults formed. The lawsuits hit, or the trade moons began fermenting preemptively in her honor. The incident rippled across the galaxy with all the subtlety of a drunken neutron star cannonballing through a space monastery. Within 36 hours of Jojo's fizzy bombardment, a dozen empires had issued emergency declarations, not of war, but of tactical interpretive ambiguity. The Krellian trade nuns, embarrassed and now spiritually contaminated by fermented effervescence, filed a grievance with the Celestine judicial fissure, claiming that Jojo's attack violated 13 sacred fiscal doctrines, 7 subclauses of aesthetic battle symmetry, and, curiously, the Anti-Flatulence Treaty of Signork Prime. But the real chaos hadn't started yet. That came when the Galactic Tribune of Conflict Archives, an overfunded think tank run by telepathic bureaucrats and passive-aggressive legal historians, declared that Jojo's actions constituted a legally undefined warfare construct, thereby triggering a mandatory review by the Department of Precedent Enforcement. This bureaucratic leviathan, known informally as the DPE, or Do Please Expire, immediately summoned over 900 analysts to comb through every frame of the ISA attack footage, pausing endlessly on Jojo's smug wink to the camera. Meanwhile, media across the galaxy had already given her a dozen titles: the Brewmistress of Battle, the Probiotic Provocateur, the Tactical Infuser. Academics scrambled to invent post hoc philosophies explaining her actions. One cult, the Carbonated, enlightened, formed overnight and began weaponizing root beer in Jojo's name. Another, the Sect of Sudden Strategy, published a 1,200-page thesis titled Fermentation and Fury, a new model for chaotic harmonics. And in the center of it all was Jojo, who had gone back to Earth for her post-deployment debrief and was trying to enjoy a taco. "So let me get this straight," she said, salsa in hand, staring at the 12-foot hologram of a vibrating squid lobster currently live-streaming an indictment from orbit. "They're prosecuting me for winning?" Rear Admiral Phillips, her handler and veteran of the great bureaucracy skirmishes of 2191, pinched the bridge of his nose. "Technically, they're not sure what you did, but they're very upset it worked." "Because it was kombucha?" "Because it wasn't on any doctrine list," Jojo chuckled. "Guess I found the blind spot in their doctrine scanner." Back in galactic space, the Krellian fleet was licking its fermented wounds, reclassifying kombucha under hazardous materials and banning all Terran beverages from ceremonial airspace. Meanwhile, Plexari high priests had begun incorporating Jojo's actions into their myth cycles, positioning her as a chaos avatar sent to rebalance the rituals of stagnation. More worryingly, several minor warlords had begun experimental fermenting operations, hoping to develop their own booch bombs. And just as the galactic legal system was preparing to charge Jojo with everything from unlicensed beverage projection to emotional treason, something even worse happened. A diplomatic courier leaked the station footage. Billions of beings across 5 sectors watched in awe as a human woman constructed a siege-class fermentation cannon out of trash and righteous boredom. The footage ended with her iconic command, "Hold my chai," followed by the fizz bomb launch and a tactical thumbs up. The phrase was instantly adopted as a strategic doctrine by dozens of planetary militias and at least one children's theater troupe. Jojo's expression during the attack, equal parts casual, unbothered, and vaguely caffeinated, was painted onto war banners, memorial shrines, and cereal boxes. And then came the copycats. A rogue Crivolian lieutenant launched an assault on a pirate stronghold using exploding kefir. A Terran outpost held off smugglers by fermenting tactical pickle brine in pressure cookers. The galaxy wasn't just studying Jojo, they were imitating her. The concept of strategic improv idiocy had metastasized from incident to ideology. And so, as the Celestine Judicial Fisher finally convened for an emergency inquest, with Grox Vintula preparing his 712-count indictment and Jojo summoned under 25 articles of ambiguous legality, the stage was set. Not just for a Yash trial, but for the mother of all galactic bureaucratic breakdowns. Because Jojo wasn't just a defendant anymore. She was a precedent. A fermented, unregulated, sarcastic precedent with an elbow tattoo that read, improvise, infuse, ignite. And the galaxy was about to find out that nothing spreads faster than an idea whose time has come, except maybe high-pressure kombucha. The Celestine Judicial Fisher had never seen anything like it, not in its 9,000 cycles of uninterrupted smugness. The courtroom dome, usually echoing with the dignified hum of legal incantations and passive-aggressive footnotes, now rang with chaos, philosophical collapse, and the unsettling sound of someone trying to muffle laughter inside a gas mask. Grox Vintula floated into the tribunal sphere like a venomous chandelier of fury, his exoskeletal carapace polished to a mirror shine. All 19 of his judgmental eyes locked onto Jojo with the kind of accusatory intensity usually reserved for war criminals and off-rhythm clapping. "Let the record show," he began, voice quivering with bureaucratic righteousness, "that the accused is responsible for an unprecedented breakdown in galactic military order, the defilement of 113 sacred battle protocols, the destabilization of 4 economies through beverage-related worship cults, and this is important, co-opting the sacred concept of honor into a slogan for her merchandise line." He hurled a glowing data cube into the air. It spun and displayed Jojo's now infamous tactical pose on a t-shirt that read, "Hold my chai, make it rain." Jojo, in full uniform with her boots propped on a grav podium, gave a leisurely wave. To the gallery of observers, scholars, and one Plexari-high monk attempting to levitate through spiritual disorientation. "Objection," she said, chewing gum. "I didn't destabilize military order. I reformatted it." Grox twitched so hard he knocked over a ceremonial statute of legal decorum. "You triggered 7 new military doctrines, Commander Halliburton. One of them involves interpretive dance before missile launches. Another allows battlefield commanders to use sarcasm as a suppressive weapon." Jojo blinked innocently. "I mean, if the sarcasm's accurate." Defense Counsel Vrenya Glix pulsed a mild lavender hue, the jellyfish equivalent of a legal shrug. "To be fair, Your Honors, the prosecution cannot prove any of these doctrines existed before my client fermented reality. The judges, and an unsettling mix of crystalline, gelatinous, and extra-dimensional life forms, tried desperately to maintain composure, but one began hyperventilating into its own tentacle, and another quietly muttered, 'I hereby motion to scream internally.' Grox, frothing now, shouted, 'We must restore order. There must be a line, some law, some decree, that forbids using fermented fruit beverage as a tactical weapon.' Jojo leaned forward. 'There isn't. You know why? Because none of your so-called empires ever imagined someone would be insane enough to try it. That's not chaos, Grox, that's opportunity. You built a galaxy that only respects plans. I reminded it that surprise is a weapon too." Murmurs rippled through the tribunal chamber. Several dignitaries nodded. A cult leader took notes with a quill made of his own feathers. The High Arbiter, a glowing sphere of collective consciousness named Glaven 3-1, finally spoke. "And what?" it asked, voice 100 tones at once. "Do you say, Commander Halliburton, to the charge that your methods have rendered our entire legal military Framework obsolete? Jojo stood, slow and calm, the silence swallowing the room as she adjusted her sleeves and walked to the center platform. I say you were willing to let civilians die because nobody could agree on a font size for a ceasefire document. I say you let tradition strangle action. I say you've built a galactic empire on rigidity and called it peace. All I did was introduce a little fizz to your flat thinking. Someone gasped. Someone else applauded. Someone tried to canonize her on the spot. The tribunal dissolved into chaos. Verdict protocols failed to load. Legal precedent short-circuited. By galactic law, when a ruling cannot be rendered within one solar rotation, the case is deferred to diplomatic arbitration, and as Jojo was the only individual currently licensed in tactical improvisational conflict mediation, she was immediately promoted to Director of Intergalactic Improvisation, a role that had never existed until 5 minutes ago. She accepted with a high five to Vrenya and immediately drafted the Halliburton Protocol, a galaxy-wide initiative encouraging field commanders to utilize unorthodox logic-based disruption events, which included, but were not limited to, fermented weapons, psychological karaoke, improvised puppet theater, and high-risk sarcasm under fire. Several empires panicked. One surrendered to a comedy troupe. Trade regulations were rewritten in limerick form, and the Krellian commander, Tholk Zur-Diak, published a best-selling memoir titled Why I Lost to a Beverage. As for Jojo, she sipped her victory kombucha on a deck overlooking Earth's orbital skyline, leaned back in her chair, and smirked at the reporters begging for a quote. Let the galaxy take notes, she said, swirling the fizz. Because I didn't win with a plan. I won with a flavor. Profile. And a grudge. And somewhere, in the infinite bureaucratic distance, the galactic legal system quietly wept carbonated tears.